Good morning. I wanted to thank you again. Attorney Galaviz and I will be presenting the case for Mr. Pahl. And I also wanted to thank you for spending the time here and making sure that Matthew gets a fair trial. One night last week, I was at home sitting at the kitchen table going over some evidence in this case. My wife arrived home, fed the dogs, changed into sweats, and popped some kind of pre-made dinner from Costco into the oven. She reminded me that our daughter's birthday was in a few days, and we were planning on taking her out to dinner. See, Melanie is a sophomore in the dorms at Marquette. Christine decided she would make a cake for Melanie. We did not have cake mix at the house, so she decided to make the cake from scratch. I offered to help, but Christine does not allow me to bake. She trusts me to cook dinners. In fact, I actually do most of the cooking for the family, but she does not trust me to bake. You see, cooking is an art, whereas baking is a science. I simply cannot, more like I do not want to follow specific recipes. So I stayed at the table and continued to go over police reports. Christine opened her laptop, Googled a recipe, chocolate cake from scratch, then went to our pantry to start looking for ingredients. All the basics: flour, sugar, cocoa powder, salt, a few items from the refrigerator, milk and eggs. Christine had most everything spread across the kitchen counter, then went back into the pantry. She was searching every shelf. I asked what she was looking for, not that I would know where anything was. She finally said baking powder. The recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of baking powder. I pictured in my head how little 2 teaspoons is. How could that really make a difference? Neither of us wanted to leave the house and drive to the store. After a bit of discussion, I finally won the argument. Christine agreed to go ahead and follow the recipe for chocolate cake, less the baking powder. She pulled dinner from the oven, lowered the temperature, and put the cake in. We enjoyed our dinner. 30 minutes later, dinner was eaten, the table and counters were cleaned up, and the oven buzzer notified us the cake was done. Christine turned off the oven, opened the door, and pulled the cake pans from the oven, and then she called me over. We both stared at the cake pans on the counter. While I may have won the argument about skipping baking powder, I knew I lost. I would be driving to the store the next day and hitting the bakery for a cake. I sat back down on the table and started reading police reports. Then I realized that this cake and criminal trials in general are like a recipe. Again, this is a criminal case. Over my 10 years as a police officer, then 23 years as a lawyer, I've learned that criminal cases are more important than regulatory actions, commercial litigation, and every other type of case. Criminal cases involve the most serious kind of government action and core individual rights and liberties. There is just more at stake, ladies and gentlemen, in a criminal case, so this process is really important. In the spectrum of legal proceedings, a criminal case is up here and everything else is down here. The government, through the district attorney, must have all the ingredients. Without those necessary ingredients, the accused person must be found not guilty. You will find this case very interesting. This is my client, Matthew Pahl. You've heard the elements for the 2 charged offenses. You heard them on Friday. You'll hear them again throughout the case. You've heard the government's belief about what may have happened in August and September of 2022. No witnesses will be able to testify with any certainty how Stephanie Pavlons' life came to an end. In a homicide case, the government always relies upon the testimony of one critical witness, that being the medical examiner. In this case, the Waukesha County Medical Examiner will testify that despite exhaustive testing and investigation, they can sum up the conclusion about the manner and cause of Stephanie's death in one word: undetermined. For you, the jury, a thorough analysis of the facts and circumstances in this case is critical. For you to find Matthew guilty, you must find that the elements of the offenses have been proven by the government, and proven by the government beyond a reasonable doubt. I cannot be sure how each witness will testify, nor do I know how the judge may rule on any objections. What do we know for sure? We know Matthew Pahl and Stephanie Pavlons had been in some type of relationship for well over 23 years. They have an adult daughter together. We know Matthew and Stephanie were never married. They had an on-again, off-again relationship. Stephanie spent periods of time with Matthew, then spent extended periods of time with her at her parents' house in Delafield. We know throughout 2001 and 2002, Matthew had been communicating regularly with at least 2 girls in the Philippines. Stephanie was not only aware of this, but she also communicated with at least one of them. We know also that Matthew and Stephanie had medical issues and were taking prescription medication. We know Stephanie had a history of mental health issues. We know in the summer of 2022, May 23rd, Matthew broke his foot and needed to go through months of physical therapy. We also know Stephanie stayed at Matthew's apartment the night of August 22nd, 2022. And the next morning, they left the apartment building and drove to Orthopedic Associates in the town of Delafield. They stopped at Quick Trip, as the state indicated. Matt attended his regular scheduled therapy appointment, then drove directly back to his apartment. Stephanie was no longer with him. We know that on September 9th, 2022, some workers were placing no trespassing signs along a small wooded area east of Orthopedic Associates and located Stephanie Pavlons' body. Finally, we know the Waukesha medical examiner cannot determine the cause or manner of death. You also heard from the state that Matthew did not report Stephanie missing to the police, but neither did anyone else. Not her daughter Layla, and not her parents. When you see certain evidence and hear certain testimony, you may not like Matthew Pahl, but you don't have to like him. This isn't a popularity contest. This is a criminal trial, and what you as a jury have to do is examine the evidence, listen carefully to the testimony, and make sure the elements of the charged offense have been met. If not, then you must find Matthew not guilty. The investigation into Stephanie's death involved the Waukesha County Sheriff's Department, the Racine County Sheriff's Department, several area police departments, the Waukesha County Medical Examiner, and the State Crime Lab, among others. Well over 12 search warrants, at least 10 subpoenas, citizen interviews, countless hours scouring electronic media. Again, this was a very, very thorough investigation. There are a couple questions I want you to ask yourself when the government presents its case. Ask, how did Stephanie get from the front seat of Matt's truck to the small wooded area where she was found? Keep in mind, her body was found in a wooded area that is bound by a heavily traveled frontage road and interstate, a very busy health center, a golf course, and homes. Ask, if Matt carried Stephanie into that wooded area, when would he have done that? Keep in mind, the government has hundreds of hours of camera footage and cell phone mapping. Keep in mind, Matt was still dealing with a broken foot. Finally, ask, what proof does the government have that Stephanie was even killed by another person? It could have been suicide, it could have been medical issues, it could have been anything. I do agree with some of the things the prosecutor said. However, there are issues in this case, and those issues will support reasonable doubt. In a criminal case, the government, having the burden of proof, presents evidence first. Only after the prosecutor has presented their case will Matthew have the opportunity to present his case. We ask that each of you wait until you've heard from all of the witnesses, ours as well as theirs, before deciding what really happened. Further, I believe the government will not be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Matthew Pahl committed the offenses for which he is charged. We expect that after you deliberate and carefully weigh the evidence in this case, you will return the only possible verdict, and that's a verdict of not guilty. Listen for the facts that support what the government is alleging. Listen for what can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And listen for those ingredients that the government must have for their cake. and be aware of what is missing. Thank you.
Thank you.